Good day, everybody. Welcome back to the NASTD Education Curriculum. This is Brad Steele, Senior Director of Unified Communications with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the 2020 National Association of State Technology Directors President. Just wanted to point out Article 1 of the NASTD Constitution, Section 2, Purposes and Goals. The second goal listed states, engage in programs for the training, education, and development of technology professionals from all areas of state government. And along those lines, I decided to put together a set of educational videos, sort of short blog type recordings, 101 sessions that help educate and let people know what's going on in the industry. I've been asking industry leaders 10 basically standard questions about technologies and services that seem to be newer or less understood by the folks at the different meetings that I've been at. So if you haven't seen the video that we put together last month, you can go back to the nastd.org website and look that up. That was on SD-WAN. But this month's recording was actually the impetus for this idea to me. About a year ago, we started talking about a technology in one of our meetings, and it kept popping up, and it was hyperconvergence. And we actually started joking around at the executive meeting last year, calling it hyperconfusion, because nobody could really explain to us what hyperconvergence was. We're a little further down the road, and I think some of us have a better idea now, but here to help us go from hyperconfusion to hyperconvergence and hopefully hyper excitement is our subject matter experts today from Dell Technologies. We have Tony Encinias, the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for State and Local Government, and Rich Barlow, Field CTO and Principal Engineer. Excellent. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump into our 10 questions that we have, and we're going to let Rich and Tony answer and see what we get. So Rich, what is hyperconvergence and what is it used for?
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for the invitation. We appreciate it here at Dell Technologies. There's a lot that goes into hyperconvergence, a lot of things that came together all at the same time to make it work. Just to give you a little background, right? So we went from, with virtualization, the ability to virtualize things, the way Moore's law has made individual machines so incredibly powerful, right? High-speed Ethernet, the ability for nodes to communicate very rapidly with a lot of bandwidth, with very low latency. Software-defined everything, everything's software-defined. You have virtualization software-defined. We have software-defined storage. We have software-defined network. It's all running in software now, right? Plus the ability to have really high-speed storage stuffed all in one box, right? You have this flash storage, which is incredibly fast. All these things came together to form something called hyperconvergence. What hyperconvergence means is I take all the data center functions that used to exist in different boxes. I used to have a storage box, right? In Dell Technologies, we still sell storage boxes, right? It's a box, it's full of disks, and it's a storage array, and you connect to it, right? You also have compute nodes. You have nodes that do nothing but compute. They run a hypervisor for running VMware. You have all the brains of the network up in the network in these boxes, right? If you took all that stuff and put it in software, you could put it into a couple of boxes. We called it hyperconvergence. We've moved all the stuff that used to be individual hardware into nodes, and those nodes have all that functionality built into the hardware itself, software itself. You have your virtualization layer, you have your storage layer, you have your network layer, all inside these nodes. That's basically what hyperconvergence is.
Okay. So if I could add something a little bit from a management perspective, Brad, just think about what he just said and how all that is encompassed into one single platform, and the management of that platform becomes a little bit easier from the standpoint that the coordination between networking, storage, and your infrastructure folks no longer has to have have meetings and takes weeks on end to implement a system in the data center. You can actually implement a hyperconverged infrastructure platform within a matter of a week or two.
So think about this, and then let me pile on there, Tony. So I've got a phone here, right? A modern phone, and it does phone stuff. It's basically all the value of that phone's in the software, right? The hardware, it's cool, and I have an iPhone, but Android phones, the hardware is very similar. The value's in the software. One of the beauties of hyperconvergence is we've taken all that stuff that used to be hardware and made it software. Really cool things about that. It's very easy to manage. You're just managing software. Literally, you go to a GUI and you're clicking through things. You're not shutting down systems and messing with controllers. You don't do all that stuff. You're literally updating software, right? No forklift upgrades needed because it's all virtualized. You can put new nodes in and move things back and forth between the nodes. Very simple. We find it lowers total cost of ownership because you're not dealing with all these separate devices, which need separate management, which need separate management teams and education for all these things. You just learn some software, right? And on top of that, one last thing, and I'll let you get back to this, is it's very easily automatable. Because it's all software, it's easy to put an application programming interface on top of that, right? So developers can automate this stuff very easily. If you look at any large cloud provider, almost everything they do inside the walls is hyperconverged because of that, because of the automation capabilities.
Okay. So in my environment, what would it replace or supplement?
So, and I like the word replace and supplement. We have to be very clear. Very few of our customers, and I support, let me be careful about the area I'm talking about, right? I support from Virginia up through Mass, up through Maine, over to Ohio as a principal engineer, right? So I do a lot of architecture for large organizations inside that area. If you're a smaller organization, you could probably go all hyperconverged. If you're all 100% virtualized, everything's running in a virtual platform, you could probably go hyperconverged for everything. Most of my customers, though, they have some stuff that's not virtualized yet. They have some things that either won't virtualize properly, or there's some barrier, that's some hardware barrier. Those things don't go on hyperconverged. To be clear, hyperconverged is for virtual workloads, right? So I like to say supplement. We call it the 80-20 rule. We find for most of our large organizations, about 80% of their infrastructure goes into hyperconverged. Then 20% goes somewhere else. Maybe it's converged, which is another conversation for us to have, a converged platform. Or maybe it's a 3-tier platform, or maybe it goes to the cloud, or who knows, right? But 80% is about what we see. But what that 80% is replacing is the old 3-tier architecture. We call it 3-tier. That means a separate storage array, a separate storage area network, and a separate compute layer. All those things get merged together in hyperconverged.
I think from a management perspective, and talking to CIOs and CTOs, the cloud first mentality, everybody wants to go to cloud, and now we have multi-cloud. We have private cloud, we have public cloud, we have clouds all over the place. Integration of those multi-clouds becomes problematic in the old world, and what a hyperconverged infrastructure platform will do is make that integration a little bit easier. And I know we're going to talk about that later.
It does make it easier. Honestly, we have, if you look at the way Dell Technologies is, the way we talk about cloud. When I say cloud, I don't mean AWS and Amazon. I mean you building an infrastructure that's automated, orchestrated, self-service, financially transparent, all those things we want that connects maybe out to a public cloud, right? Almost every single one of those we've built inside Dell Technologies is fundamentally based on hyperconverged infrastructure because it's so simple to make into a cloud. Right, to add those automation features and self-service features and developer features, things like containerization, all that stuff is very simple to integrate into hyperconverged. It's much more complex to integrate that stuff into the older architectures, into 3-tier architecture, for example, because I've got to automate all these individual pieces, right? And each one's completely different from a different manufacturer, different API interfaces, different code languages, everything's different. Whereas with hyperconverged, it's all just software, man. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and just going back to from my what I like to talk about is the cloud experience of bringing that beyond behind your firewall and having that experience like in Azure and AWS on your on-prem with integration and hooks into Azure, AWS, and Google, whatever your flavor is. Again, hyperconvergence is the way to do that. You cannot do that in the 3-tier architecture, or not very easily.
We have customers been trying to do it for decades. We have customers who have been trying to build clouds. I mean, I have a very large customer in New York City. They are a very large agency that provides law enforcement, let's do it that way. And they've been building a cloud for many, many, many years, before the word cloud was really a thing. They've been trying to do it. They saw the value of automation, saw the value of this stuff. And it's very difficult. It's very kludgy. It's very sensitive. Like one little thing changes and the whole structure falls down. And that's what a lot of people listen to this. You've been trying to work on a cloud for a long time, right? And you've been building this, right? But every time the wind shifts, it breaks, or it becomes this particular lady or man quits. And when that person quits, you've lost the talent you needed to run a cloud. It's incredibly difficult. Hyperconvergence takes a lot of that stuff and makes it very simple. Once again, just teach people software. It's a software thing. It's not a hardware thing anymore.
Okay. So what are the use cases now for implementing hyperconvergence?
So it kind of comes down in the beginning, I think, Brad, to it has to be virtualized, right? So it has to be running on top of a hypervisor like VMware or Hyper-V or KVM, or it has to be running on top of a hypervisor, right? So that's the first use case. Anything that's virtualized, right? The exceptions would be things that can't be virtualized, like I think about mainframe workloads. They're very tied to specific hardware. They have really weird licensing requirements. So there's some software where the licensing is tied very tightly to its hardware. Those things usually aren't virtualization targets. Another thing, and this is something we talk to our customers about, and we have tools to help you analyze this, is there are certain performance envelope corners where you don't want to push HCI into. It's not that HCI isn't very fast, not that it's not incredibly efficient. All those things are true. It is very fast, but there's specific performance envelopes that it's not best for, right? So, but anything that fits inside of that, we find is a great target for HCI. That means VDI, like virtual desktops, are a great workload for this. General virtualization, like literally your data center. Robos and colos, you need a small bit of architecture for, say, a school system, and they need to put something out of all these schools that has some compute and some storage. It makes it very simple for that. But the use cases are very wide. It's anywhere from core data center at huge hyperscalers like Amazon, all the way out to a closet in a school where they've got 2 servers, and those are all targets for hyperconverged infrastructure.
And how does it, I'm going to go off topic a little bit here. How does it help with the virtual desktop? How would that be implemented?
So that's a great question. And this is a very, today, COVID-19, I have COVID hair, the whole 9 yards, right? So VDI, honestly, from a technical point of view, you really want to isolate your virtual desktop workloads from your regular virtualized workloads. You want to be on different infrastructure, right? Because these performance requirements and the needs of that infrastructure are so different that it can bring your regular infrastructure to its needs, right? So as a way to bring in some new infrastructure, if you did it the old-fashioned way, you'd have to bring in a storage array and a new SAN and new compute and all the stuff and build. It takes a lot of time, right? With HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure, literally we come in, this is how Dell Technology does it. We come in and we plug in some 2U servers. It looks like servers. They plug into a rack. We come in and plug some networking in the back of those devices and plug them into a switch somewhere. We turn it on, and about maybe 3 hours later, somewhere in that ballpark, takes some time to get it all running. But you're done. There's no integration of a storage array, right? So it happens very fast, and it's separate infrastructure that you can run that VDI stuff on, and you need that. And honestly, the back end, the software, it kind of started in the VDI world. A lot of the software kind of started outside of the world, so it's very good at doing VDI too. Performance characteristics are awesome for VDI.
Okay. So when thinking about this, what hardware do I need to procure, and what do I need to consider in my environment before procuring?
I'll go off and do the difficult one first, about things you have to consider before you do this. The hardware is pretty straightforward. If you're going to do Dell Technologies, we have a product, a hyperconverged product called VxRail. We have VxFlex. We have some different products, right, that are boxes. Basically, they're servers with special hardware. That's really what they are. So as far as what to procure, it's very straightforward. Talk to your vendor, find out what their hyperconverged solution is, and you'd actually get that particular hardware. You'd also need some switches, some stuff to connect it to. They have to connect through a switch, right? That's really it. Hardware is very simple. The difficult part of hyperconvergence is it forces your teams to work differently. There's everything you add to the data center, there's three parts to it. There's a technology, the stuff, the software or whatever. There's people changes and there's process changes, a triangle, right, that you always have to consider. Hyperconvergence is difficult if your network team and your storage team and your virtualization team and your OS team and your patch team are all vertically separated. They're very separate teams. Hyperconvergence forces those people to work together very closely. Now, for example, since the software, the storage layer instead of HCI is all software, that means the people that run the virtualization team have access to all those settings. So you can lock them out of that. You can keep them from making those settings and changing things. But the storage people are using the same tool as the virtualization people, which are using the same tool as the network people, which are using the same tool, right? It makes no sense to have these vertically siloed teams in this world. It really makes sense to have a data center cloud team that cuts across all those verticals, that is a horizontal team. That is incredibly critical. People who try to run hyperconverged infrastructure like old infrastructure are doomed to failure. Bottom line, you got to change the way you operate.
So there's a lot of planning and governance that you need to put in place up front.
So Rich, can you just talk about, maybe touch base on really kind of an apples to apples comparison on the time frame, go to market of an implementation of a system versus, the 3-tier versus hyperconverged, because it'd be a good data point.
Sure. So let's look at, and I've built a bunch of data centers, right? So I've seen it in real life. When we're building a new data center and we're using 3-tier infrastructure, we're using the old school stuff of a storage array plus compute plus a storage area network plus a distribution layer. Those three things are installed and managed by 3 or 4 different teams, right? Some of the things can happen in parallel, some can't. Like, for example, I really can't test my storage array till I have a storage area network and compute in place. I have to have all 3 of those things. So there's a lot of interactions between these teams that has to happen. Now, we've gotten really good over the last 20 years at these teams working together because they've had to work together to make these things work, right? Hyperconvergence turns out all on its head. Hyperconvergence, I don't need 4 teams. I need a cloud team, which is one group of people who have some storage knowledge, some compute knowledge, some virtualization knowledge, some network knowledge. I need those people to form a team, right, that work together. They're not 4 separate teams that have interconnects across. They're one horizontal team, right? Because of that, the implementation is incredibly fast. It happens much quicker because I'm not trying to set up meetings with all these different teams and figure out calendars and schedules. I don't do that. There's a cloud team, right? And that cloud team builds this infrastructure. And honestly, because it's all software, it's kind of like asking the question, how long does it take to update your iPhone? You hit the button and you update it. That's how hyperconverged works. Installation is very straightforward. Update is hit the update button. You've updated the storage. You've updated your hypervisor. You've updated all your firmware and your hardware. You've updated your networking software if you're using software-defined networking. You've updated all your management tools. All this stuff happens from an update button. It's like updating an iPhone.
And just from a resource perspective, Brad, think about it. The skill sets from a state and local government perspective are really hard to come by in all of those areas for implementation of a system. Now you can actually get the best of the best, or train or cross train. You can have a storage guy do an infrastructure piece, networking piece, all within that cloud team. You can actually do a lot of cross training, which would be very efficient.
And to be clear, you still need. Let's not go too far over, because there's a what do we call it? There's a spectrum here, right? On one end of the spectrum, you have everybody trained to do everything. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people who have single tasks. You still need people, because remember, this supplements a data center. We still need storage people. These people need to understand storage. We still need network people that really understand networking. We still need people that really understand the guts of a hypervisor, right? But those people are specialists. I don't need teams of specialists anymore. I need a couple of specialists, and I need teams of generalists. And what those teams of generalists do, they have a higher value function. It used to be the data centers team job was to keep the lights on, right? And we see this across state and local government everywhere. Their teams are, it's the 80-20 rule again. They spend 80% of their time and money keeping the lights on, like creating LUNs and fixing Exchange and doing this and fixing SQL and performance issues. And what if we took all that stuff out? What if all that stuff went away? And you flip the equation, we're now have a lot more time to give value to the agencies, right? That's what we're trying to do with Hyperconverge. We're trying to take all that stuff, all that manual labor out, and give more time for the agencies to spend their time giving value to taxpayers, or value to the other agencies, or value to whoever the customer is, right? And that's where it really changes. We see people that used to come in every morning and their job was to watch the backups, make sure backups ran. They spend 4 hours a day on backups. You don't need to do that in this world. In 2020, that's not really necessary, right? With the right technology, the backups take care of themselves. Take that person and let them become an automation engineer, or let them become a cloud engineer, or understand a multi-cloud model, or figure out how this application X is going to move to Amazon or AWS or Azure or whatever, right? Those things take time, right? One of the things Hyperconvergence does is frees up a lot of time.
Excellent. So when putting hyperconvergence in place and operating it afterwards, what are the security concerns that we should have?
That's always the first question, right? It's funny. I do a lot of work with the state of Virginia, and I have a pretty close, I won't say close, but I have a fairly tight relationship with a lot of people in the state. And that's always the first question, because the state's where you end up on the front page of the paper, right? It's a public entity, right?
Job number one.
It's right. Job number one is staying off the front page of the paper. I agree.
Unless I hit the lottery, then that's good.
Exactly, right? Then we're not talking about any of this stuff. Then I'm going to be moving to Barbados anyway. So I guess the question is yes and no. Is there a security concern? Yes, because literally with Hyperconverge, this is one thing we can say, is that most of your eggs are in one basket, right? I have these nodes that are running software, and if that software is breached, right, we've got problems. For example, if you're a VMware shop and there's some serious vulnerability in VMware and everything's running on VMware, then you got a problem, right? But also, no, because what causes most security problems I've seen in the real world is complexity. It's too many settings. It's all that, like, for example, people getting their AWS S3 buckets broken into, right? They're not broken into. Nobody's breaking into S3. It doesn't work that way, right? What's happening is that the process for securing the buckets at the customer level is too complex, and a step gets missed, right? So one thing Hyperconvergence does is it makes things much simpler. I don't have 4 different teams figuring out how they're going to cross-connect. I don't have that with Hyperconvergence. I don't have all these different versions of software coming from different vendors that have to interact. It doesn't work that way. Literally, from a Dell Technologies point of view, if you're a VMware customer, the software in this is pretty much all VMware software. Pretty much. I mean, you can put different pieces in it, but it's pretty much all software from VMware. Because of that, it drives a huge level of simplicity. And I think simplicity helps solve the vast majority of your security problems, in my opinion.
Usually, yeah. So how does Hyperconvergence help me with my move to the cloud? So
first, and Tony, I'd love to have your spin on this as well, sir, because you've got a different view on this, which is cool. First, we have to define what cloud means, right? Let's define that. So a lot of times when we say cloud, what we mean is AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Oracle Cloud, whatever. That's really not what we mean. When Dell Technologies says cloud, we mean something different than that, right? So we think Hyperconverged is the best way for you to build your cloud and connect to a public cloud. In other words, we're looking at some kind of hybrid cloud, which means you have all those advantages of AWS on-prem. You have a service catalog. You have financial transparency. You have operational transparency. You have operation visibility. You have governance tools that are automatic. In other words, if Mary creates a new database, when it's created to the state standards. In other words, all the patching the state requires is done. That's what clouds do in general, right? So HCI helps you build a platform to build your cloud on. But when we talk about connecting to public cloud, there's huge advantages with HCI. Because how does a public cloud work? In a public cloud, do you go in and change the disks out when the disks go bad? Do you go plug stuff into network switches? Do you do that stuff? Do you go and expand a LUN or a storage array in the public? No, you don't do that stuff. How do you do it? You operate the public cloud exactly like you operate hyperconverged infrastructure. It's software. It's you reach out to a portal and click the button. You're training your people with HCI how the cloud, public cloud works. You're training them in the functions of how a cloud works, right? When you reorganize yourself properly to run HCI, you will then have the organizational constructs you need to operate public cloud as well. One of the dangerous things we see that states are doing, it's kind of it's disheartening actually to me. I've been in this for a long time, and it's disheartening, is they're building these new cloud teams for a public cloud, and they're very horizontally orchestrated. They're not vertically siloed, they're very horizontal, and they're for the public cloud, and they're leaving all their silos and stuff for private cloud, right? And you're almost cursing the people left behind, man. Don't do it. Reorganize those people too. Hyperconvergence can do that for you and give you that value, right?
Okay.
So what do you think, Tony? I'd love Tony's opinion on this, man. He's seen a lot of this stuff too. I would love to see what you think about that.
I mean, aside from the technical aspect, you just went through how it makes the management of multi-cloud, manageable, right? Makes it a little bit easier. What I look at it from a perspective of HCI, from an on-prem perspective, is that I can now realistically offer Azure AWS-like services on my data center floor, and have that as an option for my agencies and my customers, because of simple facts of maybe CGIS or maybe IRIS Club 1075 compliance requirements. A lot easier to focus and meet those requirements on your own base floor. And oh, by the way, if you're not really shutting down a data center, you might as well maximize that facility and leverage that, right? But I get it. Agencies want that flexibility and that experience from an AWS and Azure perspective. Well, you can do this now behind your firewall with HCI. And then, oh, by the way, lower your rates. And you're actually now giving the agencies the capability to keep stuff behind, on a government facility. And oh, by the way, you know what? This workload or this data, I could push that out to the cloud, from a storage perspective, because one, I don't access it very often, and it is cheaper out there, from a gigawatt perspective. So it opens up a lot of options from how do you manage your IT operations.
Let me throw something on top of that, Tony, because you brought something up I think is really important. Why are agencies going to public cloud, and why is that? There's a perception of cost savings. I think most people that actually do the math on this find there's really not a lot of cost savings in public cloud. There's some. It depends on what it is. Some things there's huge cost savings. Some things there's not. So you have to make a decision matrix about what to send to the cloud. My customers that look at me and say, we're sending everything to public cloud, it's a very immature statement. When you really look at your infrastructure, you'll understand you can't do that. There's a lot of things that won't go to public cloud. Let me say up front, Dell Technologies is not a cloud denier. We believe in the public cloud. We support it. We sell products that work in the public cloud. We are not talking down public cloud at all. But you got to ask the question of why. Okay, that's great. You're going to go to public cloud. Why is that? What do you need, right? Usually the answer is not money in the end. Usually the answer is they needed agility. They need the ability to make changes rapidly, scale up, scale down. They need the ability to add services. They have a bunch of developers writing an application, and they need a platform as a service application. They need these things that public cloud has, right? What you can do is if you do that, then you have to deal with public cloud, right? That means doing it their way. That means dealing with their security stance and their security models, which once again aren't bad. They're just different. I think the state of Virginia, there is definitely some barriers to the state of Virginia going to public cloud that are run by security, right? What if you could offer those services internally on your cloud with your security services, all the stuff that you need, but also give them that service? That's what cloud means. Cloud means taking what Amazon does well that you need and doing it on-prem too. So you can apply your security model to it. You can have your flexibility, have all the pieces to it that are important to you inside of that. HCI enables that.
Okay. So what limitations or restrictions do I need to be aware of before making the decision to go hyperconverged?
Limitation of restrictions. So it really depends. So the real technical stuff depends on the platform you choose. I mean, Dell Technologies, we have a different platform than other people in the market, and they all have different limitations, right? Basically, your limitations are going to wrap around two things. Number one, is the stuff you want to send to HCI, is it virtualizable? In other words, is it virtualized? Yes or no? If it's not, don't consider hyperconverged for it, right? That's one. The second thing is, do you have an operating model with people and process that can use HCI, that can be effective in an HCI environment? If not, I would recommend you don't use it. You're really wasting time and money. You're throwing money away going to hyperconverged if you're not going to change your internal processes and models. You need to change that. The interesting thing is I think everybody understands they need to change their processes and models. And people use HCI as a tool to enforce it, to make it happen. They're like, okay, we've been talking about it for 10 years. Now we're going to do it. We've purchased this product. This product requires a new operating model. Let's do it, right? But basically, as far as limitations, if you can virtualize it, most likely you're going to have a problem running inside of a hyperconverged system.
And how long does it take to implement?
Kind of depends.
7 minutes.
It depends. We've done it. I'm going to give you an example. So COVID-19 hit. We had some people that really needed VDI very quickly. And we had it from time of purchase. In other words, when we got the PO, right? The time it was installed and running was 72 hours because we had the stuff in stock. We had the stuff sitting there. We overnighted it, built it very quickly. So it can happen very fast, right? That's like a 9/11 event though.
Yep.
Usually we say 45 days and that's to give us time to ship and build, and we're Dell, we build it all. It's all our hardware, right? We build it and ship it. So 45 days, we can make it less time than that, but most of that time honestly is factory build time and shipping. Once it arrives on your site, it should be up and running within, at worst, 2 weeks. That's the absolute worst. We can get it done in 2 days. It takes 2 days to set it up and run most of the time. It takes about 48 hours once it's on the floor and plugged in.
And Brad, that's a really good point. I mean, it's not something that magically happens, and the skill sets that that state and local government folks currently have may or may not be conducive for HCI. So there's going to be a learning curve for the team. So whatever partner you pick to help you go down this HCI path, you got to make sure, one, they are going to be there for you. Two, they have the expertise from a management perspective and a maintenance perspective to actually get you up and running relatively quickly, and then really do train the trainer, right? Train you guys, teach you guys how to operate this environment, because it is different. It's a different operating model, and it's a different way teams coordinate and people talk. But once you get over that hump, once you get over that learning curve, you can put things together in a matter of days versus weeks.
What we recommend. Go ahead, Brad.
It sounds to me like when it's not that COVID-19, 9/11 scenario, that the real bulk of the time is getting that planning in place and that operation model in place prior to physical infrastructure.
To add on something Tony was saying though, and that's correct. That's absolutely right. Is the model we recommend for this when choosing a partner is something called BOTS. It's BOT. It's build, operate, transform. In other words, and Dell does this, VMware does this, basically everybody does this, right? We'll come in and build it for you. We'll actually set it up, we'll install it, get it all running, get everything to your standards, not just a generic template, but running in your way with your IP addresses and all your stuff, right? We will operate it with you over a period of time. So you start bringing your people in and we mentor them. It's called a 2-chair, 1-keyboard method of management, right? And they look over our shoulder and we slowly pull out, we slowly remove ourselves. Eventually we have the ability to transform, which means to leave. And we leave and we're still available. We're not gone, but it's like the mentoring model, right? It's we do it, then we do it and you watch, then you do it and we watch, and then you do it, right? And that's the best way to transform these operating models. I mean, of course, it takes somebody up top who's willing to say, this is what we're going to do. There has to be a leader. But as far as the technical teams, they see that value when they sit down with somebody beside somebody and watch them do it. Just telling them to do it doesn't work a lot of times. But try to find a partner that can follow the BOTS model with you.
Okay. So earlier we talked about the number one question, which is security.
Of course.
The next question is number two. How does a cost model work?
Absolutely. This is actually, obviously I come from Dell because I've been talking about it for a long time here. The cost model can go really any direction you need it to go. And I sound so salesy when I say that. I hate to say it, but it really does. I have customers using all kinds of cost models with HCI. You have the ability to purchase it. And this is not just Dell. I think everybody will do this. I mean, everybody will make it work. You have the ability to purchase the hardware. In other words, just buy it outright, right? So there's a capital expenditure model. We also have tons of operational expenditure models for this. There's leasing models. There are pay-as-you-go models. In other words, let's say your infrastructure will support 1,000 virtual machines, and you're using 100 virtual machines worth of it. You pay a tenth of that cost, right? So you're buying it by the drip. It's like public cloud, right? That's another possible cost model. I mentioned leasing already. Pay-as-you-go. There's lots of different ways to do this. That's possible because of HCI. Let me be really clear. It used to be very difficult to do these kind of cost models because I had a large capital expense to put the storage array on the floor. Then I had to build a storage area network, and that was a big capital outlay. And I had to put a whole bunch of blades or compute nodes or something out there, right? The big capital outlay. With this, I can literally start with 2 nodes, 2 2U boxes, and you can grow to thousands. And it's very simple for us, and when I say us, I mean Dell. We can come in and actually put in what you need and then stuff you don't need yet. And it sits on the floor and you don't use it. And when you do decide to use it, you start getting billed for it. And until you decide to use it, no billing, right? That's easy with Hyperconverged because I can add extra nodes, just like nodes of stuff and stack it up. It's called black space, right? Or dark space. Mm-hmm. It's very easy with Hyperconverged. It's very difficult with a 3-tier architecture. So Hyperconvergence gives us the ability to have different financial models too.
And Brad, I've always been a big proponent on consumption-based computing. Now HCI will allow you to do exactly what Rich had said. And think about it from a rate card perspective. If your organization is a chargeback organization and your revenue is generated by your customers, and a lot of the customers, at least in my experience back in the day when I was CIO, were always voicing their opinions that my services, one, were too expensive, took too long, all the things that, everybody that's probably going to be listening to this, has heard before. Now with HCI, you can actually establish a financial model, much like AWS or Azure, pay for what you drink, establish your rates based on that consumption, and guess what? Your rates come down. And then your customers are happy and you become a hero.
Rates coming down always makes the customers happy at the Commonwealth. I know that.
True. That's everywhere, by the way. Yeah.
So last question, but it's a general one, and I know there's lots of answers to it, but what else do I need to know?
I kind of have 4 answers for this. There's 4 pieces to what else you need to know from my point of view. Each one of these is an hour conversation in itself, to be honest with you, right? Number 1, when you're choosing hyperconvergence, when you're choosing a vendor, you're choosing how you're going to do this, right? Because hyperconverged, well, there's 2 ways to do it. You can build it yourself. You can just build all the software yourself. You certainly can do that. Nothing preventing you from doing that at all. Or you can purchase a stack, right? If you're going to purchase a stack, the thing to really look at is how actually integrated is it, right? We see there's a lot of people offering hyperconverged solutions, a lot of stuff out there, a lot of noise in the market right now. Be careful. Get yourself something that's very integrated. When you have a lot of different vendors and they're all coming together and putting their own little piece in this, there's a lot of area for slip-ups. There's a lot of area for security issues. Get as integrated as possible. If it's okay if it's not Dell, don't care. I'm just saying make it as integrated as humanly possible. That's the first thing to think about. How integrated is it? The second thing is how are you going to change your operating model and your skill sets of your people to support this? That is incredibly critical. I know we've talked about it repeatedly, but I can't say it enough. If you're going to keep the same operating model you've kept and you want to go with hyperconverged, you're missing the point of hyperconverged. You're missing why you're doing it entirely. Don't do it. It's a waste of your money. It's a waste of your time. Just keep doing what you're doing, right? So get those horizontal skill sets sorted out. Number 3, how is it going to be supported into the future? If you buy an integrated stack, the risk of an integrated stack is you've got to make sure there's a vendor behind it that's going to support that stack into the long term, right? You're putting all your eggs in that basket. So how is long-term support look? I have a lot of customers that fall into this. They've bought these integrated stacks, maybe not HCI, they bought an integrated stack from a vendor that doesn't exist anymore. And it's dangerous. That's something to be careful with. And last but not least, beware of cheap. I have a lot of large educational institutions, and they have a lot of free labor, right? Educational institutions tend to have free labor because they have a bunch of undergrads. And they love building these big, complicated science projects. They'll like download some software from GitHub, and they'll build this massively complex thing. And they're very inexpensive. It's very cheap. It's very cheap because they have free labor, right? Be careful of cheap. Things that are cheap are usually expensive in the long run. Make sure that you build on something that's well known, that you can find skill sets for. And I'll throw something out there because it's not me at all. It's VMware, right? VMware is a skill set that it's easy to find people who can support that, right? It's very difficult to find some other skill sets for other hypervisors, right? So we tend to tell people, even if we don't, if we're not making any money on it, it's VMware, push into that. Push into well-known skill sets. Beware of cheap and building science projects. The best thing you can have in an agency, this is the truth, is exactly the same thing as every other agency has. Because it's easy to do that. Don't build snowflakes. Don't make them unique. There's no reason for it to be unique, man. It's IT infrastructure. This is a solved problem. We've been doing this for 35 years. There's nothing tremendously special about the agency required to have this unique infrastructure. Don't be unique. Be simple. Be a template. Follow reference architectures. Make it simple. And you can roll your own HCI, but beware. The long-term costs tend to be very high.
Yeah, and Brad, we went over a lot of stuff today and a lot of detail, a lot to chew. But if one thing that if I was listening to this call that I would want to take away is that I've read a lot of strategic plans across the country, both at the state and local level. Pretty much everyone has stipulated they want to get into the cloud, cloud first, multiple cloud integration. If you're actually doing that and you're in earnest, want to be successful at doing that, then and you're not having an HCI conversations, then you're really missing the boat. So, if you're really going to want to go down that path of multi-cloud integration and provide, services to your agency, just like we talked today, you really should have a conversation around HCI.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I thank you both for your time. So I'm no longer hyper confused. So hopefully the rest of you can say the same. If you do have any other questions on this topic or concerns, please reach out to me and I can get you in touch with some of the folks here on the call with us, or some of our other vendors who take care of Hyperconvergence at NASTD. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, please reach out to me directly, brad.steele@mass.gov, and let me know what you think we can talk about next month or the following month in our 101 discussions. Again, thank you, Rich Barlow and Tony Encinias from Dell Technologies for your time, and NASTD community. Thank you for listening as usual, and thank you for your support.